Hello and welcome to TVB News. It has been 2 years since the city launched its mass COVID vaccination drive. Now, as the city pivots towards a post-COVID new normal, it's understood the government is considering whether to slash the number of COVID inoculation sites and only offer free vaccination services to high-risk groups. Jackie Lin reports.
After the government scrapped mandatory confinement for COVID patients, the next policy in line to be scaled back could be vaccination services. According to the latest government statistics, the average daily inoculation number over the 7 days leading up to Thursday stood at around 3,000. That's much lower than the daily number of 14,000 early this year. The daily vaccination number for the fourth jab meanwhile plunged from 10,000 to around 2,000. It's understood the government is studying whether there should be a mechanism in place to roll back the COVID vaccination drive. The idea is to continue vaccination services at public hospitals with a timetable to scale back inoculation centers and mobile vaccination stations in retrofitted containers. Dr. Lam Wing-Wall, a member of the government's scientific committee on vaccine-preventable diseases, noted the low appointment rates at government vaccination centers. Lam said the COVID inoculation drive could be adjusted like vaccination programs for seasonal influenza, which have more campaigns and services around peak infection months. Also, it's understood authorities are considering whether to only subsidize COVID vaccines for high-risk groups such as young infants and elderly people, just like the flu jab programs. William Choi, the president of the Society of Hospital Pharmacists of Hong Kong, said if COVID vaccines are no longer free of charge, one jab would set people back around $1,400 to $2,000. This is on par with the bivalent vaccines now offered at private clinics. A government advisory committee on vaccines is reportedly set to hold a meeting next week, but the agenda has no mention of whether vaccination centers will continue to operate. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
Chief Executive John Lee said the government will actively consider scrapping mandatory mask wearing after the peak period of the winter influenza season. On the last day of his Middle East trip, Chief Executive John Lee was asked by the press about the mandatory mask-wearing measure in Hong Kong, as Lee did not appear to be wearing a mask throughout his week-long trip. Lee said the authorities need to ensure that coronavirus risks in Hong Kong are manageable. He added that following the reopening of the city's borders with the mainland and the rest of the world, there will be more people coming to Hong Kong. John Lee wrapped up his Middle East trip today, describing the visit as fruitful with 13 memoranda signed. Lee said his next destinations will possibly be countries within the Association of Southeast Asian Nations due to their proximity to Hong Kong. Mimo Sangai reports.
Chief Executive John Lee concluded his week-long visit to the Middle East, during which he traveled to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates today. The CE said he is pleased with the tour, which also allowed him to promote the strengths of Hong Kong.
I think make a lot of fruitful results as a result of the visit. First of all, the Hong Kong government and the Saudi Arabia government has agreed to start our negotiation about a protection and promotion and investment agreement. So that is a very good result between the two governments. We have also to agree with the government of the UAE to start discussing the issues that we want to cover in respect of green and sustainable financing cooperation.
Lee also discussed his ambition to convince Saudi oil giant Aramco and its subsidiaries to invest and list in the city.
We talk about issues of mutual interest. I introduced to them the strengths and advantages of Hong Kong in finance and in also economic potentials. And I'm very glad that the atmosphere was positive, and both agree that we should continue close communication.
He also spoke about his next overseas visit.
Next destination will likely be countries of ASEAN because they are close neighbors and the trade and relationship have been strong. I want to raise it to an even stronger position.
Lee also mentioned the 13 memoranda of understanding or letters of intent on cooperation that Hong Kong signed with the governments of the UAE and Saudi Arabia. He said they covered areas spanning business, innovation and technology. Meanwhile, Deputy Secretary for Justice Horace Jern, who also went on the Middle East trip alongside Lee, said the businessmen and officials he met are not worried about Hong Kong's national security law. He added that he believed people in the Middle East can make objective judgments as to which information is valid. Mimosanai, TVB News.
Earlier, the UK's Commonwealth Parliamentary Association withdrew an invitation for Hong Kong lawmakers to attend a seminar. This after British members of Parliament claimed that the city is suffering from an erosion of political plurality. In response to the decision, several current and former members of the Legislative Council criticized the association's decision, saying that Britain never offered democracy to Hong Kong under its rule. Timothy Lee tells us more.
Having existed for over a century, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association UK is an organization that says it aims to support and strengthen parliamentary democracy. Its members include the speakers of the UK Parliament's House of Lords and Commons, and it boasts over 60 Commonwealth members in addition to non-Commonwealth members. Hong Kong, which had previously worked with the association, had an invitation to the 2023 Westminster seminar rescinded by the group, after what British lawmakers said was the deteriorating political situation in the SAR. Responding to the organization's claim, former Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying and lawmakers who were earlier invited criticized the association. Leung said it was hypocritical of the group to exclude the city.
It is extreme irony for this UK parliamentary group to showcase the so-called effective parliament. It is worldwide consensus that the British political system, and not just its parliament, is totally ineffective and dysfunctional. Brexit becoming Regrexit, poor economy, crumbling healthcare system, poor infrastructure. This list could go on and on. Hong Kong has done better, a lot better than the UK since it became a Chinese special administrative region in 1997.
Throughout the 150 years of British governance in Hong Kong, why didn't they adopt the parliamentary system here? And why didn't they give democracy to the people of Hong Kong? If they indeed care so much about parliamentary democracy, the decision was based on unfounded accusation and was a blatant slander on our enhanced political system.
Some lawmakers stressed that the ultimate goal for the Legislative Council was the election of its members through universal suffrage, which was granted to the city by the central government and not by the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Even though the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association's invitation is no longer there, several Hong Kong lawmakers who were able to attend today's seminar said they would like to use the opportunity to explain Hong Kong's improved electoral system. Some legislators insisted that the group's attempt to smear Hong Kong on the international stage will not succeed. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
The city's largest national security trial involving 47 former pro-democracy figures continued for the 5th day. Today, the lawyer of former journalist Gwyneth Ho said the prosecution did not send the police's expert report on the operation of Facebook and YouTube to them as early as possible. With that, the defense counsel objected to the use of the report against Ho. The prosecution admitted the delay. The judge eventually allowed the prosecution's use of the expert report, but said that does not mean the court would take the report as evidence. The prosecution also revealed a witness at the coordination meeting for the Democrats will be summoned to testify. A nurse who worked at Queen Elizabeth Hospital died after a fire broke out in a flat in Bangkok in the early hours of the morning. The fire broke out at a flat in a tenement building on Canton Road at around 3 in the morning. Around 10 residents from the block were evacuated. The blaze was put out in about an hour. Firefighters found a 35-year-old woman who was unconscious in the flat. She was taken to Kwanghwa Hospital, where she was later pronounced dead. The hospital authority confirmed that the victim was a nurse at Queen Elizabeth Hospital. An initial investigation shows the fire may have been caused by a short circuit of an external charger in the flat. Meantime, the death toll has passed 20,700 from the earthquakes that hit Turkey and Syria Monday. The United States said Thursday it will send earthquake-related relief aid to Syria despite sanctions on the country. Tracy Furness has more.
25-year-old Yusuf walked through the rubble of destroyed buildings in quake-hit Aleppo, Syria, Friday. He is mourning 5 members of his family who died. My whole family died, my father, mother, brother, sister and nephew. I can't believe this, he said. And near the epicenter in Turkey, another child is plucked from the rubble. Scenes familiar throughout the border region in Turkey and Syria, where the 7.8 magnitude earthquake hit early Monday in an area home to more than 13 million people. As rescue workers work around the clock to find survivors, experts say trapped people could survive for a week or more. But the chances of finding survivors in the freezing temperatures experienced in this region are dimming. Overall, 12,000 buildings in Turkey are confirmed to have collapsed in the quake, and the focus is shifting to demolishing dangerously unstable structures. Meanwhile, much-needed aid is arriving from around the world, including from across Arab countries, including Iran, Oman, Tunisia, Armenia, and the UAE. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Welcome back. South Korea plans to resume issuing short-term visas for travelers from China on Saturday. This after China improved its COVID-19 situation, Seoul officials said on Friday. South Korea suspended issuing short-term visas to Chinese visitors last month after China abruptly ended its zero-COVID policy. This led to waves of infections. Beijing then halted short-term visas to South Korean travelers. South Korea's Vice Interior Minister said the government had decided to restart the visa issuance after the number of infections among Chinese arrivals dropped significantly. As the war in Ukraine continues, so too does leader Volodymyr Zelensky's diplomatic trip around Europe to bolster support. David Garrett has more.
The latest scenes from Kiev as the war rages. This, the aftermath of a missile strike on an industrial area. At least 4 people were known to have died. More were injured and others were missing. This woman tells us she can't find her husband. He was at work late in the area. The rescue team search frantically in freezing conditions. And things could get more difficult for Ukraine with access to the Starlink satellite system reported to be restricted. President of SpaceX, Gwynne Shotwell, was quoted as saying that Elon Musk-controlled company has taken action to prevent Ukraine's military from using Starlink technology. She said they were limiting their ability to use the system for military purposes. Shotwell said, "There are things we can do, and we have done." Meanwhile, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky was in Brussels to try to gain more support for his beleaguered nation as he addressed the European Parliament. Zelensky thanked EU lawmakers for the large-scale military assistance to Kyiv. He said Ukraine is changing its institutions to move closer to a European way of life. And if Ukraine is winning, then the EU is winning. But what Zelensky really wants are fighter jets. EU leaders have pledged to look at boosting ammunition production. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said Germany would stand by Ukraine, but did not go as far as committing more military assistance, such as fighter jets. He said that Germany will support the Ukrainians as long as it is needed. In Russia, former President Dmitry Medvedev, during a visit to a factory in Siberia, said Moscow could increase production of its tanks in response to potential European arms supplies. Meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin says Russia's economy is surviving Western sanctions. He again reiterated his stance that it is Ukraine that are the aggressors. David Garrett, TVB News.
Britain's economy showed zero growth in the last 3 months of 2022, enough for it to avoid entering a recession for now. But households continue to wrestle with double-digit inflation in 2023.
Well, the fact that we have avoided recession, in fact, we're the fastest growing major country last year, shows there is underlying resilience in the UK economy. But we are not out of the woods. Inflation is still much too high. That is causing pain for families up and down the country, which is why we need to stick to our plan to halve inflation. If we do that and play to our strengths in science and technology, we really can be one of the most prosperous countries in Europe.
The respite is likely to be temporary. The Bank of England forecast last week that Britain would enter a shallow but lengthy recession starting in the first quarter of this year and lasting for 5 quarters. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend.